Well, hello, friends, and welcome to another Ask Zac. Hope you're doing well and have news. I have launched AskZac.com. So please go there. I am in the process of posting a lot of my old vintage guitar interviews. And I'm posting the unedited, sometimes extended interviews and with extra pictures and extra content. So I hope you will go to AskZac.com and go check it out. And today, related to that, we are going to answer the question, how did I start writing for Vintage Guitar Magazine? Well, just to give a little bit of background, I have a Bachelor of Business Administration from Belmont University. And I basically have no background in journalism at all. And so it was while I was working for Brad Paisley, Vintage Guitar Magazine did a cover story on Brad. And Ward Meeker, who is the editor of Vintage Guitar Magazine, was handling the interview with Brad. And he was asking him some questions about some of his gear and such. And of course, most of them Brad could answer readily, but every once in a while he'd ask him a question that was that Brad didn't know, and he said, "I don't know, you'll have to ask Zac." Well, Ward ended up doing a sidebar on me with the purpose of covering the gear, but we talked a little bit about me, and that kind of started the ball rolling. So then Ward and I started kind of emailing back and forth, and of course I was honored to be featured in a guitar magazine. I mean, that was huge. I can remember, I think we were on the road and we were in San Antonio, and I can remember going to a bookstore in San Antonio and buying up like 5 copies of Vintage Guitar Magazine because I was so excited to be actually featured in a guitar magazine, because I've been like the biggest guitar, nerd there is in many ways. And, I used to go to old bookstores and buy up used guitar magazines all the time. So to actually be in one was just kind of the end all be all. So Ward started asking me questions every once in a while because he knew I was somewhat connected in Nashville. And, everything from like I can remember him once saying, "Hey, can you find out what kind of thumb pick Brent Mason uses? Because one of our readers would like to know." Well, I quickly found the answer and responded with it. And out of the blue, Ward says, "Would you be up to actually having your own column in the magazine called Ask Zac?" I can't remember if we were, anyway, it got named at some point. But anyway, he asked me if I'd willing to do kind of a question and answer column. Well, I had zero experience, as a writer. I think I had written some content for Brad Paisley's website at one point. But at that point, there was a little fear, and I was a little afraid about, falling on my face or looking bad. But, Ward was very kind, and of course he did a lot of editing and fixing early on. And he still does some fixing and editing. That's his job, and he does it well. But so that's how it started. So then, I can fondly remember, having my little disembodied head on the cover of Vintage Guitar, and it had at the top of the page it said "New column, Ask Zac." So that was back in 2005, and so I've been with him ever since. And I have learned so much from that and gained so much from it, and that experience and doing that changed my life. I would not be where I am today if I hadn't have said yes to Ward Meeker all those years ago. So I learned so many important lessons and made so many important connections through working with the magazine. One of the big lessons I learned was from doing interviews. So the very first interview I did was with Tom Bukovac, and that one was a lot of fun. And the reason I wanted to do it was Tom was an up-and-coming session player, and he wasn't, I think he played on a couple of number one hits, but he wasn't like the guy yet. And I had been around him some, and I just had a world of respect for him and his playing and his intensity, his musicality. You know, he's a wonderful guy, and I hope if you haven't checked it out that you have gone to his YouTube channel, and I think it's 501 Chorus, which is of course the Roland version of the Space Echo, and it's amazing. He puts up content every single day, so at least so far he has. So you need to go check that out. So I had the chance to interview Tom Bukovac. It was at a studio. It was a Rascal Flatts session, and they had finished for the day. And so there was an engineer there, and there was Tom, and we went into one of the side rooms, and we just sat down and recorded an interview. And then I transcribed it. I had to take my own photos for it. There was no photographer for it. And so, yes, I'm going to have that posted on askzac.com. You're going to get to see the unedited version of the interview and also the photos that I took that were used for it. And that kind of whetted my appetite. And so then I got up the courage and I said, hey, can I do a bigger interview? Can I do a featured interview? And what about Brad Paisley? And Ward was kind enough to allow me to interview Brad Paisley, and it was a cover story. After that, and this was the interview where I really learned a lot from. So I got the chance to interview Richard Bennett. Now, if you're not familiar with Richard Bennett was part of the kind of late era Wrecking Crew. He played on Neil Diamond, Billy Joel, Bellamy Brothers, all sorts of sessions. And then he moved to Nashville in the 80s and was producing like Steve Earle and Emmylou Harris and Marty Stewart. And then in the mid 90s, he joined Mark Knopfler's studio and touring band and has been with him ever since. So huge fan of Richard's playing, and I pitched it to Ward Meeker, the editor, and he agreed. And I went to Richard's house, and we sat down and did this interview. Sat down and talked for about 3 hours, and then I started transcribing it. And I realized that I did too long of an interview, and I'm having to transcribe all these words because there was no transcription software or anything like that. And the other thing I realized was I was ashamed at the amount of talking that I did in the interview and how much I was talking about myself and my own experiences, which the interview had nothing to do with that. It's like it'd been one thing if we were just sitting down and having a conversation, but it wasn't. It was an interview, and that changed me. From then on, I was much more quiet, and I let the subject do the talking, and I just kind of steered the ship to where, we didn't go aground, and we kept, on interesting topics, but I didn't, interject a bunch. And that made it to where when we started doing the True Tone Lounge 5 years ago, it equipped me to do better interviews. And so I've gotten the compliment many times that you don't get in the way of the subject and you let them tell their own story. And that's purposeful. That's, that's something, there's a lot of thought that's been put into that. And it's all because of that painful interview I did with Richard Bennett. It wasn't painful at the time. It was painful listening to it, after the fact. So yeah, that was an important lesson. Another kind of funny thing that happened was I pitched an interview with Keith Urban and a cover story. And Keith really hadn't been covered in guitar magazines at that point, which was a horrible shame, and I was trying to correct that. Well, we did the interview, and then 2 days after the interview, he went into rehab, and I was glad he was getting help, but I was a little scared. I was like, what's going to happen with my interview? And the editor, Ward and Alan, the publisher, had to think about it for a second. But I was really glad that they came to the conclusion that they were still going to put Keith Urban on the cover, and that was a great experience. And I was glad to kind of get to shine the spotlight on a guy that since then he's really gotten the respect he deserves. So yeah. And then continuing to do the Ask Zac column, and of course that the True Tone Lounge kind of got birthed out of that. Getting to do gear reviews, very educational. Getting throwing a piece of gear and then having to really kind of describe it and critique it honestly. And sometimes you have to learn how to say not so nice things in nice ways, because sometimes you can't, you don't want to trash something, but you can't say something is amazing when it's not. And sometimes you have to write things in a way where, people can read between the lines. So, but yeah, so yeah, doing the articles, writing features, getting to interview, some of my heroes, and getting to continue to do the Ask Zac column, which I'm still doing it to this day, and I love doing it. Yeah. So recently, because of kind of the extra time that I had on my hands, my wife and I went about cutting out every single column, review, and feature that I'd ever done over the last, almost 16 years, and we put them in scrapbooks. And it's really fun looking back at those. And again, I'm gonna start putting a lot of that, material up on my website. And so every week there'll be new, content kind of from the archives, and also stuff, new things that are happening now, and also, posts for my Ask Zac channel here on YouTube. So hope you'll go and check that out. And I hope through me telling you this story, that you can, when you're given the chance to do something that's a little scary, that you're a little fearful about, I hope you will say yes. I hope you will not be so scared about falling on your face or looking stupid or something like that, that you'll miss this great opportunity to grow. Because again, my life would be very different if I had said no to Ward Meeker 16 years ago. It changed my life, for the better. And just like I've a bunch of other things in my life that like working for Brad Paisley. Yeah, these things changed my life. And I didn't know how to be a guitar tech, but I learned how. I didn't know how to be a writer, but I kind of learned how. Ward might disagree, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed me telling a bit of my story, and I hope you will keep watching, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.